Hello, and welcome to Pluralsight Expert Access. I'm your host for today's episode, Erica Cuttitta. And if you're new to the series, this is where we gain access to some of the best minds in tech to hear how tech leaders are solving business challenges and hear their take on what's new and what's next. Our guest today is Dr. Alex Lawrence. Alex is an associate professor at Weber State University in Utah. Before entering higher ed, he was a self-made entrepreneur who sold multiple companies and had one partnership reach number 34 on Inc. magazine's 500 list. Lately, Alex has been leading a hypergrowth SaaS company while founding a large EV car dealership and online EV marketplace. He's also been making waves for his takes on ChatGPT, with his commentary featured in the Wall Street Journal and with appearances on CNN, NBC News, and more. Welcome, Alex. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Erica. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, so you've had such a varied background, right? You're an entrepreneur, a teacher. Tell me a little bit more about how you got started. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, well, I think that anybody that had me in their classroom would be surprised that I'm a college professor and have a doctorate degree. I was certainly not, that wasn't part of the plan. I was a mediocre student, didn't love school all that much at the time. And I didn't really have something that I wanted to be. I didn't have a lot I moved around a lot, grew up in a lot of different places, and so it wasn't super clear to me that I wanted to be a this or a that. But what it turned out that I guess I really wanted to be was an entrepreneur. I just didn't know that. And so here we are.
Yeah. What would you say was the moment when you realized maybe after trying college and figuring out like entrepreneurship exists, and how did that become apparent to you for your next, your big move, right?
Yeah.
Your first move into that space.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was not necessarily a moment. It just came very natural to me. I mean, if you were to ask my mom, she'd say, she got a knock at the door one day from some neighbor kids, friends, whose parents were upset that I had been selling their children my broken toys. And my response was, I didn't make them buy it, right? And so my mom knew I was good at sales, and I enjoyed that process and stuff. And so I was always starting little businesses as a kid, kind of the lemonade stand type stuff, detailing cars, and I rented calculators. You ever have one of those expensive graphing calculators?
T184.
Yeah. I thought that was such a waste of money, so I rented those and to other students and stuff. So, I mean, it was always something that I was doing from a very, very early age.
Yeah. So, Alex, you've been really active in the ChatGPT voices as of late. Can you tell me more about your stance and why people are so drawn to what you're saying and what you're talking about here?
Yeah, it's been a surprise to me a little bit that they have been and that I'm here. As somebody that's an very, very early adopter of all things technology, I mean, I'm quick to sign up to be first on whatever list I hear about. I'm quick to pay the fee to try something. I'm quick to order it on Kickstarter, and some might say it's a little bit of an addiction or a problem, right? But so when new things come out, I'm always interested, and I've been early to the market. I was the very first person to get an Uber ride in the state of Utah.
What?
So I was waiting for them to come, and I was waiting for it, and I was like, and they said, "You're rider one, so just silly little things like that, right? Just because I want to experience stuff like that. And so with ChatGPT, it was just kind of par for the course for me that I'd read a little bit about it and I got access to it. It's just the difference that in terms of how it impacted me so quickly and immediately. I sat there for hours and hours and hours trying to do all kinds of different things. So it's different than my other early adoption experiences, but kind of follows a pattern. And other things like that I'm always testing. When I first saw ChatGPT in early December, got launched in late November. Immediately, I kind of had two thoughts. One was, this is going to change everything in the business world. And two, as a professor, this is the greatest cheating tool I've ever seen in my life, right?
Yes.
And so for me, it was a very visceral, instant reaction that this was something really, really big. And so that was during the break. And when we went back to our semester starting in January, it was an easy decision for me to say, I'm not only going to allow it in all of my classes, because I'm already teaching AI stuff that uses AI, tools, technologies, so that wasn't foreign, but I was going to embrace specifically ChatGPT. And so I came to class. Most of my students, surprisingly, 90% of them had never heard of it before in early January, which was surprising to me. And I started kind of writing about this in LinkedIn, Twitter, and that I was allowing it, that I was encouraging it, and at the same time, institutions, school districts, they were shutting it down.
Yes.
They were forbidding it. They were blocking it in their networks and stuff like that. And so writers and journalists started looking for people that had a point of view.
Right.
And this gentleman from the Wall Street Journal found me, and I guess my point of view was and is somewhat unique. And we can talk about that.
So in the past, have there been other technologies that you've kind of been as vocal about? Tell me more about that. And was your stance or your bet on those technologies, did it come true? What was the outcome?
Yeah, so I mean, some of my friends that are big technologists and people like yourself that are very deep in the industry, a few of them have said they think I'm going to look silly or foolish in a year or two, that this is not nearly as big a deal as I'm making it. And most of them compare it to two technologies in recent years. One is Bitcoin, and the other is virtual reality. And, I can just tell you from my own personal experience, I believe in both of those technologies as being very meaningful, very important, going to do really cool things, but I didn't have nearly the same reaction, both privately and publicly, that I've had with ChatGPT and AI. So for me, this is very different and something I am putting my flag on the hill, and then I'm saying this line in the sand. I'm on this side of it. And hopefully I don't look too silly.
Do you think the hype will die down?
Sure. I think to a certain degree, you look at the adoption curve of any new technology, right? And it doesn't stay steep and to the right forever. But I think that there's a couple things that are going to keep it going for a very long time. The most obvious one is all the money that's going into it.
Yeah.
So when you've got billions and billions and billions of dollars and all the smartest minds are working on it, and that's going to create all kinds of new things that we don't even know about yet. And that's going to create more interest and more popularity and more adoption, and that'll extend the curve up and to the right. But I think something like they had something like over 1 billion visitors to the ChatGPT site or something like that in the last week, and so it's still moving up, but I think the hype will die down a little bit, but I think the adoption and use of it will actually just continue to increase.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the adoption into higher ed.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested to hear how you got to the place where you said, hey, y'all, this is going to be for reals. Let's just embrace it and move forward. I want to hear about that moment, and what was the reaction from your students? Yeah,
so I think there's certain disciplines that are a lot tougher than others. So the stuff I teach a sales technology class, which is LinkedIn and Salesforce and HubSpot and Gong and this stack, right?
Yeah.
So that's AI enabled, AI supported. Very natural for me to talk about that.
Right.
The other one I teach is sales proposals, which is presentations, pitches, written, verbal, video, in-person, stuff like that. So not a huge leap for what I'm teaching to allow those kinds of things. I'm also really fortunate that the department I'm in and the university I'm in, they like that I do things out in the real world.
Yeah.
They like that I'm involved in business and that I try new things. It
gives you street cred, right?
Well, but they encourage me. I'm like, hey, I want to do this. And they're like, do it. Go for it.
That's great.
So I didn't have a lot of fear, trepidation that's, somehow, and even if I did, that doesn't worry me as much as maybe it should, coming from the outside world, right? And so I thought, I'm just going to do it. And I have the academic freedom to do it and the support of my peers and friends at the school to do it. And so, as I mentioned, when I came into class, and I hadn't raised their hand how many had used it, only about 10% raised their hand. That was surprising to me.
Right.
The 10% that had heard of it, the 10% that had heard of it had also used it quite a bit.
Yeah.
So they were hooked right away. And so I think they were surprised that when I said, you can use this to cheat really, really well if you want to.
Right.
And the stuff I'm going to teach you will enable you to be a better cheater if you want to be.
Right.
And so I know they were kind of a little bit taken aback at that. But in my view, there's so many ways to game the system if you want to.
Sure.
It's a losing game of cat and mouse.
Right.
And since I think this is going to be such a critical tool in their the skills that they need to have in business and their career, I have to teach them how to use it.
Yeah.
I'm not doing my job if I don't.
Exactly.
But it's tougher for your English teacher or math teacher or some of these others. It's not quite as cut and dry on how you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. What about the concept of AI taking over jobs, especially in tech, right? There was a Medium article where the author stated that developers shouldn't be scared of ChatGPT taking their jobs. And then he wrote a follow-up article saying he was wrong once and reworked it. So what's your take on ChatGPT taking developer jobs? How big of an issue really is this, if at all?
I think it's a very big issue. And I don't know how it's going to play out. And I can just tell you kind of what I'm thinking and hearing and considering. But things like Copilot, and there's all kinds of tools out there that help developers write better code, write code faster, things like that. So that's, I mean,
that's a real strategy.
Yeah,
we do that every day.
Sure,
right?
And you can teach me a lot more about that than I. So that's not new. What I think is interesting, what I'm hearing from my developer friends and the people that work in my businesses, are the fact that it can write such good code without them having the starting point.
Yeah.
And then it can make their code a lot better really quickly.
Yes.
And that should make them a little bit nervous if they're not going to up their game, if they're not going to continue to skill up and continue to learn more and use their experience and things to do things that the AI can't do, at least not yet. But I do think it's really interesting if 6 months ago, if you had a parent and you were going to say, hey, I don't know what my kid is interested in or what they want to go into, what would you suggest? A lot of people would have said a software developer because they make good money and there's good job stability and there's opportunities, right? And here we are 6 months later. That's not quite as obvious as it once was, because I think the more entry level positions are the ones that are easier to replace with AI code tools. And so it's not going away. It's not going to be sudden. It's not going to be dramatic.
Yeah.
But there's going to be some pretty significant change in those job roles, and I think it's going to be sooner than later.
Yeah. I remember many years ago when Ford came out, the CEO of Ford said, "We are now a tech company." And I grew up in Michigan, and so I follow, all the cars and all the things. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what everybody's going to become. And here we are, a good 10 plus years later, where that was actually true. All companies are now becoming tech companies, right? Healthcare, fin, no matter what industry you're in, technology is a basis for how everyone at that company does their work, right?
I couldn't agree more.
And so I do think that as we progress through the next phase of whatever technology is new, ChatGPT is here, right? How are we going to adapt and become that next level employee, next level engineer that can utilize the tool for an efficiency, but then also start to move towards the new reality, which is you might not be, a level 1 programmer might not exist in the future.
Yeah.
And how do you enter the job market as a level 3 programmer? Because that's what everybody's looking for, because these other jobs may not exist. I think that's a little bit provocative though.
Very.
I mean, what do you tell your students who are getting degrees in technology, and you're, out there saying, hey friends, your job might not actually be there when you're done with your degree?
Yeah, for sure. I'm telling them though that they have such a unique opportunity. They get to be first.
Yeah.
And so the example I use, and I use Adobe typically, but I'll say Pluralsight this time around, but it doesn't matter. I say, look, how many spots on a vice president's resume at Pluralsight do you think you have any parity with? Zero, right? But when it comes to ChatGPT and AI, you can be right there with them.
You can level up.
Right? And it's such a critical skill too. It's not like you have this little obscure thing that you're really good at because of something and they're not. No, it's like a very significant portion of their skill set that they have the opportunity to catch up quickly. And so that won't always be the case.
Right.
But right now it definitely is. You've got a chance to really take advantage of it. But I think businesses, developers, students, the attitude should be probably similar, I think, to the one I'm taking with my stuff, is embrace it, become an expert in it, figure out how to use it and leverage it, and then be transparent about that. Typically you'd be looking at me as a graduate, as a level 1 programmer, and I've learned how to use this tool and this tool and this tool to augment my skills along with my degree. And guess what? I've jumped past level 1 programmer, and I can show you. Give me some level 1 programming problems to solve, right? And I'll do it. And that's really probably all you care about, right? So I actually am ready to apply for a level 2 programmer. So they're going to jump over that if they put the work in. But if they just come out of school with the kind of the standard stuff, and I'm an employer and I can have, all the arguments for machine versus human, which is an interesting discussion we can have in a second that I've been thinking about. I mean, for some companies, it's going to be a non-starter. They're not going to entertain it.
Absolutely. I do see that there's opportunities. I mean, business is business, right? And so if you can reduce your cost by headcount, by utilizing tooling that might be free, or hiring people that have the skill to use a tool that is free and apply it to their job, you might be like, I don't necessarily need, 10 to 20 level 1 engineers, but I could use some more level 3 or 4 or 5 engineers, right?
Right. And there's already examples of that. I think there's 2 examples that I can think of. One is this idea that has kind of come to me over the last week. I think there's going to be a kind of a Made in America group, the stamp, where it's like our company is all humans. and you don't work with AI. Our work product isn't AI, and people that matters to them, they'll buy from that company, and they'll back and forth. So I think there'll be a niche there and a segment there that they'll come up with some name, and that'll be the stamp. And you might even, it might be like certified organic or something. You know, you've got to go through some process, and I think that'll be
prove that
valuable.
You're not using AI or something.
Because it's going to be hard to discern in a lot of cases. But I think there's other groups where it's like, you know what? Not only does the business want it, but the customer will want it. And an example that I'm thinking about is like a call center. So let's say T-Mobile. I call. It's a 5-minute wait. I'm the third person in line. That's one strike. When I get on the phone with somebody, maybe English isn't their first language. Not a big deal, but might be a little bit of a communication barrier there. Maybe another strike, right? They might be having a bad day, or it's the end of their shift. Possible another strike. Maybe they don't know the answer. They're new. Have to put me on hold. You know, so there's all these things there that happen as a customer, and they're only open from 8 to 6, right, Monday through Friday. So if they're open all the time, and I don't have to wait, and they speak the language of my choice, whatever that may be, and they know the answer right away, as the customer, why would I want to talk to a human? I mean, and on the flip side of that, as the business owner, now you've got, you don't have to pay insurance and, all the reasons. So you've got two sides of the coin there that both want that. And so there's some industries that I personally think are going to get obliterated. And I don't know how else to think about it, because you've got both sides of the equation that want it.
What's your prediction there? Like, what are you thinking about? Like, where is this the most applicable today? That is the first to transform.
Well, I mean, the easiest is stuff that's in writing, because the one I'm talking about is a voice, empowered AI, right? Which you can do. You can do that, especially when the questions are kind of repetitive and simple and things like that. So the easiest ones, I actually think a really, really obvious one is lawyers, the legal profession, because so much of what they do is written. And famously, ChatGPT passed the bar exam in like Minnesota or something like that. And so for kind of low to mid-level legal stuff, which a lot of us need and use, doesn't require, and I'm sure I'll get some hate from my brother's an attorney. So, but I think, like you need an operating agreement for an LLC that for the state of Utah, that might be a 6-page document that's fairly benign. And I just did one. That's why and ChatGPT did a great job. And that just saved me, a couple $100. And so, there's still lawsuits and going to court and which, by the way, did you see, what's the company they do? They got permission to have AI represent somebody in court for a traffic ticket.
Oh, really?
And the lawyers came after them so hard with lawsuits that they changed their mind, but they were going to have glasses and an earpiece, and this person was going to have them as their lawyer. And I thought, well, think about it. They've got all of the case law in history at their fingertips. They've got this listening to it and coaching them. I mean, who wouldn't rather have that for the subscription of $9.99 a month, right? To get you out of a traffic ticket, right?
Exactly.
So, and that's just like scratching the surface. So, but I think teaching is another one where people start to question the value. And I've said this often. We're going to have to up our game. We're going to have to up our game as teachers. Like, I got to have a compelling reason for them to come to class, to listen to me, to think that I add value, right? Otherwise, they're already halfway out the door in a lot of cases, and I don't blame them. Honestly, I don't. And so, those professions come to mind kind of immediately, but also creatives. I saw I believe it was Eminem, not him, but they took kind of a deep fake version of him. And then they used ChatGPT to write a new song as if it were him.
In his tone. With his...
And then they used an audio one that took all of his music to grab his voice. And they made essentially a video of a new Eminem song, like the first 30 seconds. And he had nothing to do with it. And so then you start talking about other artists and art and how do you authenticate stuff. And not to go off on too big of a tangent, but I think it all of a sudden makes for a really interesting use case with NFTs.
Tell me more about that.
Authentication, you know?
Like, how do you authenticate that is something that came from Banksy or that came from Eminem? If you have AI generation, like, how do you prove that?
I mean,
it's not?
I think NFTs in the blockchain, and they were already pitching that as a thing for authenticity, right? But now all of a sudden, authenticity is way more important because it's so much easier to create a realistic fake. And so,
Totally.
for example, Eminem, using him as an example, comes out with a new album.
Yeah.
You have to get some sort of an NFT from him to make sure that every song on that album was actually him.
Yeah.
But maybe it wasn't. Maybe he had help writing the song. Maybe he
Right.
had help, and again, you start going down this slippery slope of, what's plagiarism, what do you have to disclose, what you have to not disclose. So, yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff happening there.
No, that's really cool. One other thing that I think is challenging for those of us in tech to truly understand and think about how big this could be is when we see problems with the data sets that are feeding the models, right?
Yep.
So ML data sets generally are all inclusive. Everybody plays. And so since, ChatGPT itself was built based off of the model where it's using open source from the internet, it still struggles sometimes to know what's the truth and what's not.
For sure.
So how do we overcome that? Because I think that's where people in tech like us who are, there might be people who are like, there's no way, it's so bad at its job right now, right?
Yeah.
What would you tell them? How is that going to be overcome? How is that going to be fixed?
Well, it's a very real problem right now. And the thing that's interesting about it is ChatGPT and others, they can sound really right.
Right.
And
they're very convincing.
They're very convincing. And so
but so is a lot of other stuff on the internet.
True.
Right?
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
So if you don't really know, sure sounds good.
Yeah.
And so that creates a problem, right? If
Right.
you're presenting something, especially if you're presenting something that's relatively important.
Yes.
And so there's a certain layer there of knowledge and research and understanding, but that's right now.
Yeah.
And you keep in mind, I know you know this,
early
but
days.
it's 2021 and before for ChatGPT, so it doesn't have anything from the last 2 years.
Right.
And it's not really using the internet in a way that's meaningful and powerful. But I actually like Bing's new beta product better than ChatGPT right now because it really is using the web and it provides hyperlinks and has kind of a more of a blended use. And ChatGPT will get there.
Yeah.
It'll get more updated, more real time. And then Google, I know Bard was a big flop and it was a big mess.
Yes.
But people that don't think they're going to be a massive, massive player in this are very naive because they've got more data probably than anybody in the world, right?
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
once they figure out how to harness that in real time and they're getting more every millisecond, those kind of errors will go away. And the easiest one, I asked it to tell me about me.
Oh,
and
really?
I got it totally wrong.
Google
wrong
yourself.
School. Seriously, try it and see what it does. Totally wrong school, wrong degree, wrong department. At least I was a college professor and at least I was right. But if I didn't know those things, I would have read it and thought, oh, wow, okay, that's pretty good bio.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
But a year from now, I think it'll nail it on all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so, but it's a problem right now for sure. But I don't think it's going to be one, in the next, certainly in the next year. Or more.
I think you're right. And I think generally the model itself is a bit new and it needs to be tested and tweaked, just like with any new technology that we start to harness and use in our daily life.
Yep.
Tell me if you could create a robot AI for good, what would it do or what would it solve?
Well, immediately comes to mind is a medical professional.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think, so I don't know if we're talking like hardware robot with, software, operating it. Yeah. But I think there's so much opportunity there for customization that we're starting to see a little bit in healthcare. But, in my dream world, using AI in a way that can really, because that's really about making decisions based on information that you have.
It very much
right?
is.
And so if you can gather all this data, you've got all the Johns Hopkins research on this thing
Mayo
coming
Clinic,
in, right? And in real time, that's going to should be better than any human doctor can grab that.
Absolutely.
Now, they've seen it a lot before. So when you start to get into these really
nuanced things.
Experts, right? I still go on a human, but I think there's a lot of things that I could very quickly be told that I have something or I should take this or do that or try that, that I think would impact a lot of lives very, very quickly. So that's the most obvious one for me.
Yeah. Healthcare is one of those spaces where I think, the general population might struggle if they weren't interacting with a human to human because we're just so used to that.
Yep.
And so I think as we're getting more comfortable with things being different and changing, I can see healthcare being one of those areas where some people might be fine with not seeing a human face-to-face for healthcare interactions. Would my grandmother feel that way? Maybe not.
Sure.
But over time, as people get more comfortable with it, something like, an automated system that you enter your symptoms, you talk about, or maybe even just conversate with an app.
Yeah.
And then it conversates back and tells you what its thoughts are, could get you, part of the way there for much cheaper than maybe an actual office visit.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And not too far off.
No, and accessibility is a big benefit to all of this.
Yeah.
Think about all the things that make so much easier for people that maybe don't speak the language or have a hard time finding the right place for training.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways that it can help them learn much more quickly.
Yep.
And there's a lot of, that generation is, the generation that's coming up, though, gets more and more and more comfortable with this. I'm always reminded of my in-laws when you first could start buying things on the internet. They would make me buy things for them with my card,
Yes.
and then they would reimburse me because
Yes.
they didn't want to put their card on the internet because
Right.
somebody would steal the money from the bank, right?
Yes.
Well, now they buy stuff all the time.
Right.
And so it just took some time to get comfort and stuff.
Yep.
And so same thing, whether it be healthcare or some other tools, I think you're going to start seeing people get more and more used to AI being around in their lives, especially as it becomes less obtrusive.
Yeah. Tell me about kind of the morality behind this, right? Like, what ethical considerations do you think are important for AI and ML development? And how should companies be ensuring that their work aligns with these considerations?
I think that's the hardest question about all of this by far. And we've seen a few examples of this as people are trying to game the AI and get it to say things and do things, whether it be, tell me about Trump and Biden, or, Microsoft famously, the AI started kind of trying to convince this married man to leave his wife for the AI, right?
Right.
Stuff like that. And so there's always going to be people, bad actors, trying to get it to do things that it shouldn't. And at the end of the day, it's a difficult question because a lot of things that we ask AI are based in opinion.
Yeah.
Not everything is based in fact.
Right.
And so I think we have to get comfortable with that, just like any other source of data, that you might be getting an opinion. And maybe the answer is certain things are prefaced by, this is my current opinion.
Right.
Based on all the information I have, I think this. You just have to be prepared for a large group's going to disagree with that, and then they're going to totally discount everything else that it says,
Right.
as being biased or programmed by a certain group that thinks a certain way, one way or the other. But on a little bit deeper down the path, there's some deep fake and impersonation and plagiarism issues that are going to be really tough to handle and manage.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen because there's incentives for people to do that stuff.
Right. Well, and I also don't think necessarily that our legal system is set up to take on some of these big, huge issues that are coming in front of us with technologies.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And so it's not just, is it right or wrong to try to use AI to trick someone, but then if you trick someone and something else poor happens to them, bad happens to them, they lose money, what are we going to do, right?
It kind of blows your mind a little bit when you think about all the different ways that can go and what can you do to mitigate it. Has it become illegal to do certain
Right.
things? I'm sure some of that stuff's coming.
Yeah.
And it's a worldwide challenge, so some countries are going to do things more aggressively and more quickly
That's
than
true.
others. And I'm really watching
We see that today,
for that. Yeah.
right?
But I don't know. I think that's an ongoing discussion and debate that I think is really going to be very, very important.
Do you think there's any tipping point coming up or kind of catalyst to actually having kind of a broader conversation about regulating tech in this way and AI specifically?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the people that are leading it, whether it's the, Musk, they're more afraid of AI than any other problem facing the earth, right? Which is kind of tells you something.
Right.
So I'm not worried about it like killing us and Terminator kind of stuff.
Right.
But I do think it can have very significant impacts on society and culture. And so, but yeah, there's going to need to be some sort of guidelines, and I'm sure there'll be some legalities associated with that too. I just don't know where they're going to be yet.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I do think that there's times too where something like ChatGPT could accelerate the bad guys that exist, right? Are you worried at all that there's going to be this application that goes very much in the dark, in the negative, with something like ChatGPT, so much so that people start to kind of be like, nope, we're not using it, we're ignoring it, it's not valid anymore? Do you think it could get that extreme, or do you think like there's going to be enough good guys to outweigh the bad guys, and we're all going to learn from each other as we go?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really thought about that. That's an interesting question. My knee-jerk reaction is there are definitely going to be a lot of people that that use it in ways that it wasn't designed to try and figure out ways to do bad things, whether they're dark or illegal or morally wrong or ethically wrong or even just distasteful, right? That's already happening, I'm sure. And some subset of the web.
That's reality.
Yeah, and that's okay. I mean, that is what it is. But I do get concerned with things like I was thinking about like a world leader, let's say that passes away.
Yeah.
And the AI technology can essentially keep them alive in terms of a digital version of them, how they sound, how they look, how they walk, how they act, how they talk. And then who controls that? And what do they have that person say? And the kind of horrific impacts that could have if the leader isn't. And I know that's kind of an extreme thing, but technologically it can occur, especially if that person isn't out in public a lot or isn't in the public eye very often and things like that. So I start to think about things like that and it gets pretty scary. So I think it's going to go that direction. I think there's going to be a lot of bad guys and girls out there that do stuff like that, and that's where you start to the folks that are at the lead of this AI. Those are the things they worry about. They're not worried about a lawyer not getting paid to write an operating agreement anymore. They're worried about this other big existential threats kind of stuff and how AI can empower those kind of behaviors.
Exactly. Great. I'm going to change topics a little bit and talk about programmers again. Alex, do you see developers embracing tools like GitHub's pair programming, AI Copilot? And what do you think developers should do to ensure these types of machines don't take their jobs?
Yeah, I mean, the good ones are embracing all that stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, and I know lots of them, and they've been using it like we talked about earlier in this for a while now.
Yeah.
I think, like I said, I have a few friends that are really, really talented developers and programmers that think this is hyperbole and it's gonna blow over. And I don't disrespect that viewpoint at all. But I am saying, guys, I think you're taking this a little too lightly. And so I think rather than dismissing it, I think the best ones are going to really dive in deep. And really try and get on all the beta testing lists and all the new stuff. And really, I mean, if nothing else, they're technologists. They should enjoy it. Right? Just for fun,
just
mess around with stuff.
That's what we do all the time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. But these folks have a high standard for technical quality, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're not as wowed by myself or others that aren't doing it full time in their career. But I think if they can kind of step away outside of themselves for just a minute and go, okay, how does this affect the normies, the regular people that are out there doing this stuff? I'll give you a good example. I heard or saw or read something, and I can't give credit to where, but I loved it. It said, 5 years from now, it's going to be $300 to get an iPhone app made, and it's going to be $3,000 to get your toilet replaced. And so it's going to be like this really interesting flip-flop between blue collar and white collar kind of stuff. Now, the numbers might be off, but the concept was similar. And I think, I think that can be true if it can build a basic iPhone app for me, right? That the App Store will allow me to submit and will approve. That I can design the looks just through text and talking, hey, change this, change that. I want it to do this. I want to be able to accept this. If it can do those kinds of things, for free or very inexpensively, and I'm building iPhone apps, well then, okay, I'm probably done building the basic ones. So what can I do to level up from that? Well, maybe I'm not done doing it. Maybe I lower my prices and I adopt AI and I'm building them way faster. And so I change my approach. I'm building more faster for less. I'm more of a volume play.
Different languages.
Maybe I go upstream and I'm doing really custom, high-end stuff that good luck, find an AI that can do this for you now. And so, but you've got to make that decision, not just kind of ignore it or dismiss it or, it's going to go away. It's a fad. I think that's a huge mistake. And I think you're missing an opportunity. You're first. You're on the front lines right now. You've got a chance to be an expert and to embrace it and leverage it and use it to skill up and then ride the wave. As opposed to kind of, have it come crashing over you.
You're right. So. Do you see any worry from any of your students or anybody that you talk to in kind of the AI and machine learning world that says things like, well, everybody's going to be able to do what I do now, right? I mean, because if I think about it from a pure software engineer and then a machine learning engineer, these are different skill sets. And now that my software engineer buddy who sits next to me can use ChatGPT or other tools like that to actually do part of my job, why do they need me? What would you say to that machine learning engineer?
Well, I'd say two things. One, take yourself out of the kind of the self-preservation mode. That's how you make and say, is that a bad thing?
Right.
Right? If other than it affects my job and my living, and those are serious considerations.
Sure.
But is it a bad thing if I'm making technology way more accessible to people that don't have the training that I have, so they can do more things and access more? I think most people would say no. That's generally a good thing, right?
Yeah.
But at the same token, it's kind of like, well, just because they know how to, hold a gun doesn't mean they know how to shoot a gun and hit the target and do all these things. Now, building an iPhone app isn't a weapon of mass destruction that you can, right? But conceptually, there definitely is some guidance and some expertise and some experience that you can't just replicate overnight. But again, I will say that I think that if you believe the entry-level stuff that has already been proven can be done by this stuff isn't going to get better and move its way up the chain, I think you're mistaken.
Yeah.
And so it's just very naive, it's very short-sighted, and I think it'll bite you.
Yeah.
So embrace it as being good for them and good for you, and then try and figure out a way to leverage it and write it and have it be a part of your toolkit.
I think that's really great advice. Making it part of your toolkit, I think, is going to be necessary with all new technologies. Understand what it does, play with it a little bit, see how you could use it, see how you could apply it, and then try to incorporate it into your work or into your side gigs or your projects that you do for fun, and utilize it for the better, right?
Sure, yeah.
So Alex, tell me about any, unintended consequences you might, be thinking about, or you might see coming at us with things like ChatGPT.
Yeah, so one that has occurred to me over the last little while is this concept of scholarships in university. I've been on scholarship committees for a while, and there's generally 3 criteria used in awarding a scholarship. The first 2, they largely have no impact over. One is their financial need, and it kind of is what it is.
Yep.
The other they have impact on, but not at that moment. That's their grades. It's representative of the historical performance, and at the time they apply, it is what it is.
Yep.
So the differentiator is the essay. Right. And so as I've read these essays over the years, the spectrum of essay quality is quite broad. And so you've got some that put almost no time into it and you wonder why they even did it, to some that you can tell really put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. And those, as long as they meet the other criteria, and most of them do, most of them are kind of in a lump on those other 2, that's the differentiator. And that's what gets them the scholarship.
Right.
And so as I'm preparing to read the first round of scholarship applications, this next go around, I'm almost positive, based on what I've seen in my classrooms, that we're going to go from a broad spectrum of bad to really good essays to a lot of all good to great essays. And so the unintended consequence of that is this. A lot of people really need scholarships to go to school.
Yes.
And they can't go to school otherwise. And being able to go to school and get a degree and graduate or whatever is life-changing, generation-changing in some cases, right?
Yes.
And so now you've got somebody who maybe doesn't get a scholarship because somebody else has figured out better prompts to ask ChatGPT, and they've spent 1/10 of the amount of time, and they get the money and they don't. And I can promise you that's going to happen. And so as a person reviewing those kinds of things, I'm thinking, what do we do? Do we have them come in and present? In person?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. And you can't do that at scale.
Right.
And there's lots of institutions that aren't going to do that. They're just saying, well, if they did it, they did it. Are you going to disallow it? And then how are you going to know that they used it? And so there's just things like that, scenarios like that I'm starting to realize, wow, that's going to kind of unfairly punish some folks that historically would have been rewarded for their efforts.
Right.
So, anyway.
Well, and you don't want it to create, a shift in who gets those scholarships, or even things like who's, the bias of maybe it rewards students who are white versus black in the writing, right?
Yeah, yep.
And so I do worry that sometimes our inherent biases that exist on the internet are being used to create the model, could come out in the model as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of other scenarios like that, but stuff like that just I don't think anybody's thinking about that, but those kind of scenarios are going to start to come up.
We do, when we hire at Pluralsight, we do have, coding challenges, right?
Sure.
And my prior company did as well. And I remember that there was a coding challenge that my prior company had, and it was so hard, many people didn't finish. And I imagine now, everybody's going to be the winner of that coding challenge. So how do you differentiate yourself in those days? I think we're going to have to start thinking outside of the box to come up with ways to kind of make sure that the right human gets the right reward, the right job, the right scholarship, because there's going to be tools that are going to be readily available for us to kind of mimic a perfect essay or mimic perfect code.
For sure. And if you're in the C-suite or you're an executive or you've got to start thinking about that stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Because who you hire and what they do and what their skill set is, it's going to be increasingly more difficult to differentiate. So you got to be thinking about ways to figure that out. So your team is full of people. I mean, this is one of the things I tell my students. I'm like, look, if you don't really embrace this, you're going to be in a meeting shortly after you graduate and somebody's going to ask you something and you're not going to be able to say, just a minute, let me ask ChatGPT, right? They're going to have an expectation that you've got some education or some learning.
Yes.
And so that's going to get you.
Yeah.
And so,
there's going to be some bars that are going to, exist.
Yep.
That if you're using it too much and you're using it to kind of fake it before you make it, there's a point at which you got to make it yourself, right? You got to figure it out yourself.
And there's one other scenario that just reminded me of.
Yeah.
So I think AI is going to be a very active part in meetings, all meetings. It's going to be a Siri listening, voice activated kind of vibe.
Yeah.
And so you're in a meeting with your sales team or whatever, and you're talking, you say, hey, what were our sales second quarter last year? Boom, it's
Brilliant.
got them, right? Okay, what's the name of that competitor's product that they just launched last year? It's this, right?
Yeah.
And so just real quick, instant answers. You're going to have AI is going to be a presence in your meetings,
right?
And stuff like that. So thinking about things like that, I mean, now your meetings are going to be shorter. They're going to be more efficient. The expectations are going to be higher.
Yes.
And so it's just fascinating to think about all those changes that are coming.
Oh, I can't wait for it to make our meetings more efficient, right?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Best meeting's a short meeting for sure.
Yeah, absolutely,
Cool.
absolutely. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to talk to you in Expert Access, and I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.